The opening ceremony. Firstly, and most importantly, I'd like to thank the Honourable Prime Minister for his feature address. It was a pleasure having you here with us today, and to Mr. Eugene Tier for his opening address. And thank you to our many sponsors. Our 6 platinum sponsors, who are Shell Trinidad and Tobago Limited, the National Gas Company Group of Companies, BP Trinidad and Tobago, First Citizens Bank, BHP, and RBC Royal Bank. Our 6 gold sponsors, Repsol Angostura Limited, Proman, Atlantic, Baker Hughes, EOG Resources, and Perenco Trinidad. Our 11 silver sponsors, Tucker Energy Services, Point Lisa's Nitrogen, Massey Wood, Touchstone, Peterson Integrated Logistics, Tenaris, Sensia, and Hydrotech, Citibank, Point Lisa's Industrial Port Development Corporation, and Schlumberger. Thanks also to our workshop sponsors, our technology partner B-Mobile, our audiovisual partner Avit Support and Sound Vision, and our media partner CNC3. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to put on this conference. Thank you to Devon Stewart, the arranger of BP Renegade Steel Orchestra, for his rendition of the national anthem. Thanks for CNC for their media coverage. That brings us to an end of the opening ceremony of the Energy Conference. The Honourable Prime Minister will now be cutting the ribbon. I believe they have cut the ribbon from the look already to open the conference. So the conference is declared open. Thank you, Prime Minister. They will now be seated. I think that there are some seats. I see a number of people standing. I think there are some spare seats if you come around at the front on your right, and a few seats here and there between people. A couple in the middle column. I see a few empty seats. So I'll just wait a second to allow people to take their seats. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it now gives me great Caribbean energy sector. This session is going to
Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, the Honourable Dr. Keith Rowley, members of the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago, my fellow ministers from Barbados, members of Parliament from Trinidad and Tobago, distinguished guests, all members of the Diplomatic Corps. My background is not energy. I say so up front. but my passion is the Caribbean. And it is against that background that I accepted the invitation to speak here today, because there is much conjecture as to what the future of this region holds. Our growth has been anemic at best as a region in the last 20 years. Our financial services sector is being threatened by underperformance and that low growth. And as a result, moves are being made to relocate financial institutions that have populated this region for in excess of a century. It requires self-examination on our part as to how we move at the beginning of this third decade of the 21st century to chart a way that can secure prosperity at best and stability at worst for our people. The projections shared by some in the Caribbean Development Bank are not great and show that without intervention, this region can be one of the poorest regions by 2050. That is the job of those who look only at the data and who do not understand the potential intervention of political will and the will of the people. I have come to Port of Spain this morning because in the year that I was born, 4 leaders of this region got together and determined that there had to be a future post the demise of federation. I've come to Port of Spain because I also lead a political party whose constitution requires of us that regional integration be the objective to which we aspire. But I've come equally conscious that as we have nurtured this integration movement, with the exception of a veiled reference at Article 15 in the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas that asks of COTED, which is the Council of Trade and Economic Development of our integration movement, asks of COTED that they literally promote measures for the development of energy and natural resources on a sustainable basis. The revised Treaty of Chaguaramas is virtually mum on how we treat to the issue of energy. This has been a bugbear for many, and I need not repeat what your chairman of this chamber has indicated or the distinguished Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago spoke to in his speech, that electricity prices and energy prices in the Caribbean have been prohibitive, particularly for those of us who are trying to craft out a way for development for our people. And when you look at the fact that you are meandering between 20 US cents and 37 US cents to be able to produce electricity, no wonder the IMF has declared that this region is one of the regions that has had their competitiveness completely eroded by the cost of energy. It is against that background that this region, as we enter into the third decade of the 21st century, has a duty to do 2 things in particular. 1, treat to the issue of accessibility and affordability of energy, both at the level of households and companies, but also as a source of revenue for governments and a potential saver of foreign exchange for governments. And 2, to treat to the issue of the absence of access to financing for too many of our regional companies for whom access to finance has become a bad word, largely because of the absence of risk, of appetite for risk by our financial institutions in the region, who believe that they should only undertake projects in the way that a man would wear belt, suspenders, and a hoist to keep his pants up. The bottom line is that we have become as risk averse as it is humanly possible for any region to have before it. And we can choose to accept those circumstances and risk the possibility of becoming that poor region of 2050, or we can choose a different road. A road that was crafted initially by those who understood that the climb back from a region that has been highly exploited and colonized would require of us first confidence in our ability to manage our affairs, a determination that our actions be based on principle and values, not just at the level of our leaders, but at the level of all in our society, and a determination that we should be fair to all, but always first fair to ourselves. It is against this background that I believe that the call just now by Prime Minister Rowley is one that we will support entirely, for the issue of energy to be placed at the center of the regional discussions, because for a regional community of sovereign nations in the third decade of the 21st century that now has not just Trinidad and Tobago, but at least 5 countries involved in both hydrocarbon and all countries at some point or level, at least aspirationally, willing to participate in renewable energy, that to fail to have an appropriate protocol governing how we deal with each other first and foremost before dealing with anyone else in the world is now incumbent upon us. And that is the principle of the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, that we treat each other better than we treat anyone else as a third party. That is the principle that has allowed manufacturers here in Trinidad and Tobago to be able to reap the bounty of exports to a region that has been prepared to accept its goods while not allowing the level of competition from the outside world by reason of the reduced access and duty-free access for Trinidadian goods as compared to goods from outside. It is the reason why Barbados has benefited from an export of services once we moved from Carifta to CARICOM and moved from an area of trade in goods to one that admitted trade in services. There are benefits that we give each other. But the form of economic policy adjustment that my government has pursued has been based on a very simple premise, that those who share in the burden must equally share in the bounty. And it is why our own adjustment economically in the last 2 years has been based effectively on sharing the burden between capital and labor, between domestic, regional, and international players. And it is an understanding from a very simple premise that we learned at primary school, that many hands make light work. If we accept that this approach to burden sharing is one that we would want to pursue, and sharing in the bounty, then we begin to understand that there are some issues that we have simply to address. I speak here as the person who was the Attorney General at the time when we pursued maritime delimitation disputes with Trinidad and Tobago. But I also speak as a person who understood that the ability to move beyond that point put us in a place for us not the one that will bring the greatest economic benefits to our people or the greatest financial benefits to those of our service providers who want to participate. For those who believe that that maritime delimitation remains as a risk, we know how financiers and commercial players treat to the issue of risk. Premiums are literally taken from us in a way that ought not to be, because there is no science equally to the pricing of risk. It therefore means that we can choose to dig our heels in and fight for every ounce, or we can remember that we are family in a community of sovereign nations and pursue approaches that other parts of the world have pursued, such as Australia and East Timor, with the establishment of joint cooperation zones. Norman Washington Manley once referred to the Caribbean Sea as the patrimony of this region. It is up to those of us who are charged with the jurisdiction of our countries to recognize that the only people who benefit from aggressive maritime delimitation programs are lawyers and scientists, and not the people of the region. I hope that the courage that both Prime Minister Rowley and myself have shown by the signing of that joint cooperation agreement will mean that others will recognize that this generation of Caribbean leaders is prepared to put first the patrimony of the region and the benefits of our people at all costs. We recognize that in our family there is a player that has virtually a century of oil and gas experience. You cannot make that up. You cannot fabricate that experience. And to that extent, Trinidad starts as a first mover always within the Caribbean community with respect to oil and gas. This region will only mean something if we are prepared to leverage our expertise for the benefit of each other. And in this case, as I've indicated, as we move towards the basin in the Guyanas, whether it be in Guyana, whether it be in Suriname, the reality of that experience is there for all to draw upon. Similarly, the reality of Barbados' experience within the financial services sector, or the reality of engineers from elsewhere in the region, cannot be ignored, because the very revised Treaty of Chaguaramas is premised upon the basis of the movement of our factors of production, the rights of establishment, the ability to move capital. We have not yet perfected elements of it, but we need to move with dispatch so to do. Rights of establishment have to be respected in all forms so that there is a seamless capacity for entities and persons to establish businesses in other Caribbean countries. This is particularly so given the fact that I've referred to the underpopulated nature of the region over and over. This region's greatest problem as we move into this decade, as we seek to turn around what has been anemic growth, is the absence of population and the absence of skills. It is against that background that a number of things will have to play, some of which are not appropriate for me to go into in detail today, such as the establishment of a minimum floor below which none of our citizens should fall with respect to the provision of education and health care. But insofar as we have the capacity to be able to draw on each other's skill base and draw on the fact that this region has $50 billion in domestic savings with excess liquidity and with an inability to draw it down for productive purposes, we need to find the solutions to be able to allow it to work for ourselves. and not to see the energy sector purely as one that is driven by foreign direct investment and only to be benefited by governments through taxation and royalties. There is a future for energy in the region, and that energy is both the hydrocarbon industry and the renewable energy industry. In Port of Spain, in December of 2018, we met at the Hilton Hotel and we signed the Port St. Anne's Declaration, which reflected our commitment for the first time to bring the regional private sector and the regional labour movement into the Conference of Heads of Government, such that they can be major players as we build out the growth prospects for this region. One of the 4 areas identified for immediate involvement of our private sector, which has now established the Private Sector Association and will be sitting at the table formally for the first time since its constitutive documents have been signed in the upcoming intersessional meeting. One of the 4 areas is in the area of renewable energy. We would be fooling ourselves to believe that we can avoid the difficult discussions of our time. And those difficult discussions will be to what extent and in what manner can we allow the hydrocarbon industry to coexist with the realities of climate change. More and more, we are recognizing that it is not a linear discussion and that there is a role for hydrocarbon companies to play to be part of the solution and not simply to be the bane of our existence with respect to how we have been able to fight these issues. I look forward to our region playing a critical role in what really is a difficult discussion, but an essential discussion. And why? Because it is our countries that are on the front line of the climate crisis. It is our countries that have seen the advent of climate refugees within recent years. It is our countries that may face complete demise, as we have seen with the total evacuation of the people of Barbuda, the total evacuation of the people of Abaco, the complete demise of the economy of Dominica, and